Today on Listen Up, hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes. They're called acts of God. So should God be sued? Some people think so. That's next. Welcome to Listen Up. I'm Lorna Dueck. Whether it's natural disasters, crimes of man, it's hard for any human being to go through life without encountering some sort of grief or hardship. In those times, it's difficult for people to find an answer to the question, why is this happening to me? In 2005, a Romanian prisoner named Pavel M. filed papers to sue God for not protecting him from the devil. The suit was thrown out because the defendant, God, was not subject to the laws of Romania's jurisdiction. In 2001 comedy, The Man Who Sued God, Billy Connolly sues the Supreme Being because an insurance company refuses to pay for damage caused to his boat in an act of God. Popular shows like Ally McBeal and Boston Legal have featured episodes on the theme. On a far more somber note, in 1995, author and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel wrote The Trial of God, based on his witnessing 3 inmates staging a mock trial of God in Auschwitz for abandoning them. And finally, in 2008, Nebraskan Senator Ernie Chambers chose to sue God through that state's judicial system. While he was trying to make a larger point about frivolous lawsuits, the case made headlines around the world. It also got people thinking, how far should we go in holding God responsible for things that go wrong in the world? Today we'll meet the man who sued God, Nebraska Senator Ernie Chambers, and we'll explore our tendency to blame the divine in times of pain. Then later we'll hear from Paul Young, author of the bestseller The Shack, a sensation that struck a nerve in North America as it addresses what God means to us in times of pain. Many people do like to blame God for what's wrong in the world. In times of pain, they feel abandoned. Joining me now from Nebraska is the man who sued God, State Senator Ernie Chambers. And Senator, thank you for being with us. Tell us, what was your goal in launching this lawsuit?
I can sum it up in a sentence: to make sure that people understand that each person is entitled to his or her day in court, no matter how unpopular that person is or how disliked the issue that the person brings.
Okay, so this was an issue that you felt should be pinned on God. Why did you choose God as your case?
The principle, if I merely stated it as I did to you, would have just been ho-hummed away. Just like if I wrote a book that nobody would read or composed a song that nobody would heed. If I had just stated the principle, nobody would have paid attention. So I needed that hook to catch the public's attention, engage their mind, and get them to see how important the operation of the court system is in assuring that every grievance should have a right to at least one review by a judge.
Okay, so you didn't really care about the God part then, is that right?
Well, I had a lot of fun with that, and it took on little centipede legs of its own, ran all around the world, and believe it or not, that seems to be what most people are interested in. But since I brought the lawsuit, I'm prepared to discuss any aspect of it. I do mean all of the things that I said in the lawsuit, that God, based on what people say, knows everything, is all-powerful, nothing can happen without the will of God, so the tornadoes, the pestilences, the birth defects, all of the horrendous things that happen in the world are God's will, and God caused them, and intended to cause them, intended the result.
Okay, Ernie, do you believe in God?
That's a question that doesn't allow of a yes or no answer. I'll tell you what I do believe in. I believe in algebra.
Okay, give me one other of your points that you put up against the defendant, God.
All of the terroristic threats that we're told have been made by God will lead to strokes, heart attacks, great anxiety, discomfort, uncertainty, and it's all done to try to coerce people to comply with the will of this God they supposedly believe in.
Now, where would you base that on? I don't see anywhere that God's got coercion on our health issues.
Well, the coercion is based on the notion that if you don't do what supposedly is the will of this being, then you're going to be punished in this world perhaps, but if not here, certainly after you die by going to a place and being burned forever. This lawsuit is like a satirical essay to teach other people something.
Very interesting. And Ernie, tell us how this has all concluded. I believe your lawsuit was eventually thrown out because you could not find an address for God.
Right. So now I have it docketed in the Nebraska Court of Appeals, where I will prosecute my appeal and demonstrate that the judge, in not only dismissing it, but said with prejudice, which means it cannot be filed again, I will show that he went too far in his ruling. That should be reversed, and I should be allowed to start all over. That, in a nutshell, is the point I'll be pushing on appeal.
So you want God back in court for all of these charges of abandoning his duties?
Every one of them. And what I'm seeking is a permanent injunction so these negative actions will end and so the terroristic threats will stop. And when I've been asked, how in the world is the court going to enforce that order? Why would you ask the court to do it? I'd say for the same reason and on the same principle that people will bring a lawsuit against what is considered a big-time criminal. Governments do this in absentia. Without the power to bring the person before that court, that person nevertheless is tried, convicted, sentenced in absentia, and the court has no power over that person. So the fact that there's not power to carry out an order has not stopped courts from issuing them anyway, and I want the same consideration.
All right. Ernie Chambers, Senator Chambers from Nebraska, thank you very much for your interesting story.
Okay, and I appreciate the opportunity.
When we come back, a #1 bestseller, a phenomenon that deals directly with the question of how God can help us when we find ourselves in a house of pain. Paul Young and the Shack, next. Well, we'd love to hear from you this week on our topic, why do people blame God when things go wrong? You can write to us at listenuptv.com. Today we're looking deeper at the curious reality of people who go so far as to sue God when their world seems unfair and out of control. A #1 book on North American bestseller lists tackles the question of where is God when life hurts. Listen Up's Ricky Ratliff caught up with Paul Young, its author.
In your book, Mac talks about war and murder, and he says to God, "You may not cause those things, but you certainly don't stop them." I think we've all asked this. Why does God allow bad things to happen?
Ah, boy. That's really a question that's at the heart of this entire book. And to have a pithy little answer is not that easy. People have asked me, why did you pick this scenario? And it's because the love of a parent for their child is as close to the heart of God as anybody can get to understand what that kind of love is like. It's still just a reflection, but it is close. And the deepest kind of pain raises the deepest kinds of questions.
In Paul's New York Times bestseller, The Shack, Mackenzie the character asks God the hard questions for real pain.
Our freedom to accuse and blame and all those things is part of how God respects us, to give us that right. But He doesn't take it like a human being does. He's different than us. He doesn't take it personally. Our blame of God comes from a very basic misunderstanding or a belief in a lie. And when you deal with the issue of God, the issue is His character. That's what's the fundamental issue. What is this God like? Is He good, and is He involved? And that's the question that's at the heart. You know, there's a little conversation where Papa finally says to Mac, you don't even believe I'm good. And Mac says, finally, he acknowledges that that's true. And he says, I don't know how to get from here to there. And Papa says, well, you can't. But together we can.
For Listen Up TV, I'm Ricky Ratliff.
As pastor of the People's Church, one of Toronto's largest congregations, author and theologian Charles Price has dedicated much time to thinking about the issues and implications of how we interpret pain. I spoke with Charles recently in Cambodia about the complex relationship we have with God in times of suffering. Charles, tell us your reaction to the idea of somebody suing God for what's wrong in the world.
Yeah, that was an interesting case. And of course, if it was a serious thing, there's some assumptions behind that need challenging. The basic assumption being that everything that happens is God's responsibility. In other words, that God has created a universe which He sovereignly controls, and every detail is His responsibility. And I think the Bible challenges that significantly, because what's wrong with the world is not God, but people. And the reason is that when God created, according to the book of Genesis, and this therefore is the Christian understanding of this, He gave to human beings dominion over the earth. And in the exercise of that dominion, we can keep God out or we can bring God in.
Do you think he should have sued the devil? If you want to be serious about what's wrong in the world, should he have sued the devil?
The devil is a created being. God is not created. So they're not two equals, a good and bad, fighting either side, and God sort of has the edge. We have a very interesting story in the book of, in the Old Testament, the book of Job. And Job was the prosperous, well-respected man for whom everything suddenly goes wrong. So suddenly Job woke up to discover his loss of his business, his livestock, most of his servants, his own children died in a house that collapsed on them. And it says that at the end of it, when all this had gone wrong, he fell on his face in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I'll depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away." And it says, in this Job did not sin. And so then next chapter, Satan soared up to heaven again. How you going with Job? Well, you knew that when you told me I could touch anything except his body, that he really only cared about his own physical body. If he wasn't in pain, he could cope. And God said, all right, touch his body. Don't take his life. You can touch his body. And
it goes on increasingly worse. He touches his children.
Yes.
Am I powerless in the cosmic battle between what's going on with Satan and God? Like what went on with Job. Am I powerless with that cosmic battle between Satan and God?
Well, it depends what you mean by powerless. Job didn't and couldn't stop the events that happened to him because those were decided outside of himself. But where Job had power and the ability to do what was right as opposed to what was wrong was in how he responded to that and his unflinching trust in God during the horrendous things that happened to him. I mean, it is true that bad things happen to good people.
So where does God stand on that?
Yeah, there aren't simplistic answers to these questions, and philosophers and theologians have wrestled with these, and to find a little simple answer is not easy, probably it's not possible. But I think if we stand back and look at the big picture, when God created the world and all that's in it, He defined it as being good. That word repeats in Genesis. God saw all He had made, it was good, and then it was very good. But He gave to human beings the ability to choose. He said that they were to rule over the earth, they were to have dominion over the earth, they were to subdue the earth. These words are used in the book of Genesis.
And that is ultimately the thought that Charles wants to leave with us, that it is the free will of man, not God's will, that creates evil in the world. And perhaps the first step in trying to rid evil in the world is for man to make himself, not God, responsible for it.
There's not a situation where you stand back and somehow these bad things, these evil things are happening, unless, of course, you talk about the effects of nature, such as flooding, drought, tsunamis.
Acts which insurance companies would call acts of God, which leads people to a confused state in blaming God. When we come back, more of our interview with Charles Price and the nature of good, evil, and our responsibility for the reality in the world.
Closed captioning provided by Duca Financial Services Credit Union. Discover more affordable banking at duca.com.
We love getting your calls, voicemails, emails, video clips, and letters. Pop by our website and answer this week's question. Why do you think so many people blame God when things go wrong in the world? You'll find all our contact information at listenuptv.com. Suffering is part of who we are. Just like you can't have right without wrong, so too does hurting come with being human. We continue my conversation with noted author and theologian Charles Price to hear his thoughts on how to make sense of our pain. Systemic evil, Charles. Does that have its origins in the devil? What's my role in that? What's God's role in that?
Well, our role is to fight that which is evil. I mean, evil is a moral word, so it's not just, you know, if an avalanche takes place in a mountain, you know, that's not in itself evil. It's not a moral issue that's taken place. The avalanche has taken place, the rocks have fallen, somebody got squashed by them. That is a tragic accident. But if you're talking about things that are, by definition, evil, we're talking about something that is morally wrong and corrupt. And our job, of course, is to work as God has declared the potential to do so, to bring about that which is good in its place. And so much of what's going on in our world is corrupted by human evil, and we are born in a state of separation from God. Therefore, our natural bias is towards our self-interest, and becoming a Christian, being restored into a relationship with God, is designed to correct that and create love and the self-interest takes a second place. Now, that's a process that God has to work on all of our lives because it's not automatic.
When this beautiful area was wiped out in the tsunami, where is God? Does he just turn his eyes?
I was in Indonesia soon after the tsunami, and I spoke to a conference of pastors, and there were a number that came from Aceh, which was one of the worst impacted areas. And there were people who gave testimony. They told their stories, and one man I remember telling how his wife and his 2 children were swept out to sea, his parents were drowned. He said, I stood on that beach every day for weeks and looked out to the sea, and I called their names. It was very moving. And you felt that the heartache and the absolute tragedy of the situation. But he turned to us and he said, but you know, God has done something in Aceh that we prayed for years that had never happened.
And this is where Charles presents an idea that may be controversial. The notion that in times of crisis or trouble, more people turn to God and the church. This is not to suggest that Christians are happy when tragedy strikes. Quite the opposite. It is the knowledge that if arbitrary tragedy strikes, people can turn to God for direction and comfort.
Aceh is a province where there were very few Christian believers. And he said, people are asking questions, where is God? And he said, I was able to say to people, I know the pain, I'm feeling it, I've shed the tears, I'm going on shedding the tears. But I have found in God a peace and a security that you too can know. And he said, we have never seen as many people become Christians as we've seen in the aftermath of the tsunami.
So then it is my initiative to work with the darkness as the human being?
It's to trust God in the darkness. I think that God's sovereignty in our lives, that is his directing our paths and leading us, is something which we experience without being able to explain at the time very often. In fact, very often what Scripture does teach us is that some of the best things that happen in our lives that are really good in the sense of things that really, really matter, often are born out of pain, out of suffering, out of disappointment.
Getting back to what started this discussion, if you're going to sue anyone for what's wrong with the world, then it is people.
Sue myself. Because actually, where does it all begin? I mean, we're all very quick to say it's somebody else's fault, you know. We're very quick to say that. You listen to any politician, they spend as much time telling you what's wrong with the other parties as they do about what's right with theirs during an election process. Husbands blame their wives blame their husbands, parents blame the kids blame their parents, etc. If we were to stop and say, what's wrong with me, we might get closer to finding a solution than saying, what's wrong with the world out there, or what's wrong with my neighbor, what's wrong with me. And that is what the Christian message is about. Jesus did not come with a grand strategy for putting the world right. He came with a means of putting the human being right. The result of that is you change the world.
When we return, I'll share my personal thoughts on where God is when it hurts in The Wrap. Listen Up is all about news that takes you deeper, and we're always on the lookout for spiritual realities behind the headlines. But we also want to be able to answer any questions you have about faith. Please visit us at listenuptv.com and go deeper in our Answers to Faith section. We had some great discussions over this topic today of could God be seen as missing in action? People suing God for abandoning our needs. At the end of the day, you're going to have to decide where to place your expectations. In the reality of evil and the pain that spins into the world. If there's evil, there is an originator of evil. There is cause and effect. Or do you put your stakes into goodness and its origins? In that reality begins a well-traveled, winding road of healing and hope. As a Christian, it may be tempting to surrender in the face of evil or pain, but it's not our preferred route. After a few decades now of gathering the stories of God in the world, I'm overwhelmed at the evidence of both evil and good, the evidence of God. And just on the sheer evidence of those stories collected, I'm confident that placing expectation in God is the best remedy for the aching question, where are you, God? I do agree that it sometimes appears that God is late on arrival. But what we cannot see and document is the internal work that is going on in our lives while we wait. As Psalm 40 says, waiting and waiting. Finally, God will be there. Let's not give up. More on this at my blog and at Listen Up TV. I'm Lorna Dueck. Mike wrote, as global citizens, we appreciated listening to the update on the Millennium Development Goals. The global financial meltdown and follow-up rescue plan clearly shows the planet has the resources to achieve these goals and more. Write to us at listenuptv.com and share your views on the matters we discuss.